Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again on our Wednesday midweek Hebrew word study. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous day out there for May 8th, and hope you are able to get out and enjoy that and listen to this recording at another time. And again, I thank you for your faithfulness and your support of this study. I pray it's a blessing in your life and just helps you just learn the richness of God's word and that it just is a blessing to you. That's my main purpose. So as we go to Ruth chapter 4, we're starting again the last book of Ruth here. This is all kind of culminating, and but there's just so many wonderful little tidbits here that I hope I can bring out for you. And we're just going to go through the first 5 verses today. Keep this a little shorter if we can. So verse 1 of chapter 4 starts out, Uvoaz, and that's Boaz, Allah, which is the word went up. It's also the same word used for when sacrifices are given, that the incense and the smoke that arises doesn't Allah, it means it goes up. So some interesting similarities here. And Hasha'ar, which is the gate, Vayeshev, he sat down. Notice this is, Boaz went up to the gate, sat down, and there behold, just the sequence of how things are happening, um, all has intent, all has purpose. And of course, we'll see how the sages comment on this, but you may pick up that there's going to be some providential, divine assistance noted here, just by the way this is talking about these minute, what would seem to us, why is it necessary to say he went up? Why is it necessary to say he sat down? Um, and it all leads up to, you know, seeing the divine presence or God's hand moving in this situation. And so then we get to the next word of Sham Vehine, and there and behold. So again, this is, if you could hear it being read, and you could hear the emphasis being put on, it's like, and Boaz went about his day and sat down there, and lo and behold, again, trying to give an indication of that this is no accident. This was not coincidence, because he sat down by the gate, and lo and behold, there comes this guy. And now we look at how he's spoken of in this next word is Hagoel, which is kinsman redeemer. Last week I had mentioned a little bit about this word Goel and how it comes from its root word, of course, means Gaal, which means to act as a redeemer. Um, but it also influences the word Galilee, which we know of as the city of Galilee, where Jesus spent time, and even we'll say Jesus of Galilee. Um, a Hebrew uh, fluent person in Jesus's time would have been able to bring these things together and would have understood connections as Jesus spoke, and that he came from Galilee, and put the connection between Gaal and kinsman redeemer. So these are just things that as 21st century non-Hebrew speakers would miss all of this, but a Jewish Hebrew speaker would have caught this and would have been very much aware of it. And so we start to see the parallelism, as we understand it, of this person Boaz being a kinsman redeemer, the parallelism that is brought out in the New Testament of Jesus being a very similar, working in a similar way, acting in a similar role, and the shadows and the parallels here start to become very clear. And so, behold, the Hagoel Over came by. And so he just sat down and looked up, and lo and behold, what a coincidence. This guy comes by, of whom was spoken, Asher Diber Boaz, of whom was spoken. And so what does Boaz do? He says, Vayomer. So Boaz said, Surah, come aside. Um, very interesting. All these words telling how he talked to him, how he spoke to him, to come aside and Shava Po, sit here with me. Again, very interesting use of the word po. Po is normally um, just associated with speech. Anytime you see this letter hey, it looks like a mouth. And then this little tab that comes in here is reminiscent of a tooth. And so it's used many times in the Bible to make reference to something that's going to be spoken, things that are going to be said. And so he says, Shiva Po, and a and here's two really, really interesting words. Poloni Almoni is how it's written, and it's translated as such and such. Quite just weird, what do these words mean? They sound funny to even say. Poloni Almoni. It makes you think of a phony baloney, something that we use in English. Um, and I looked up to see if there was any connection between the two, because many times words that we speak in our language are many times based upon something much older, and they're called loan words. We have many loan words in English, as every language does, as different people move to different areas, different people are assimilated into a culture, when different areas are ruled over by different type of governments from different nationalities. Those words are brought in, amalgamated into the language, and so they call them loan words. I could not find any loan word for uh, Poloni Aloni from anywhere else, but let's just unpack this, because this is pretty fascinating. It's a strange word, and so here when we open this up, it says that it is a certain one. Notice its usage is very, very limited. We see that it's only used 4 times. uh, it's used here in the book of Ruth, book of First Samuel, and the book of Second Kings. Now, what is kind of interesting here is Samuel was the prophet during this time. It is thought that Samuel was the one who penned Ruth, First and Second Samuel, and portions of Kings until his passing. And so it's kind of interesting that this word would show up only in the writings that are thought to be attributed to Samuel. So again, what does that mean? Let's look one step deeper. It says it's from the word pala, and pala means to be separated or distinct. And again, it has many places where this is used, starting in Exodus. Again, not a word that's used very often. There are many other words used for separation. Holiness is a word that's attributed to separation, but this is a different type. Talks about being distinguished. And so, what is Boaz making reference to this guy? Because it doesn't list his name. Nowhere in here does it list his name. And to have this word being translated as such and such, where they are definitely two different words, not related to each other in any way, let's unpack and look at this word um, translated as almoni. And so Almoni also means someone, a certain one. We see here again, this word is only used 3 times, and ascribed to Ruth, First Samuel, and Second Kings. Again, all three of these are books that Samuel is believed to have written. And so we look at this origin. It comes from the word alam, which means to bind. So there's a certain one, which is what Poloni was derived from, and this one is someone who is becoming bound. So what does that mean? Where's the connection? What are we supposed to learn from this? Um, it's again very interesting. So I'm going to finish this verse and then we'll go look and see what the Jewish sages said. So this Poloni Almoni, this certain one, this one that was kind of bound, specifically set aside, this person came um, uh, Vayasar came aside, and Vayeshev, and he sat down. Again, just minute detail of what's going on here. Now we look at the commentary from um, that we've been following from Samson Raphael Hirsch. And so he opens up with just a little bit of background that helps us understand the setting. He again attributes that Boaz went to the city gate, that he was the head of the Sanhedrin, which was, of course, the governing religious council. There wasn't such a separation of church and state, if you will, back then. But this was the Jewish Sanhedrin. It was the court, if you will. And so these gates are where the Sanhedrin convened. At the gate, the Torah was taught here, and disputes were settled. So when you see things in the Bible that are written that talks about that they went to the gates of the city or something happened in the gates of the city, this is the reference behind it, is that it was a place where business was done. So as Hirsch talks about, they sat down there, and again, right away, he brings out the spiritual side. He was confident that God would arrange something for him. This is taken from Igeris Shemuel. And just like then, the Redeemer passed by. And of course, they note the striking coincidence of this Redeemer passing by at just this very moment. Again, looking at the spiritual side of this. And here they even get a little bit more fanciful sometimes. It said, according to Shemuel Nachman, Bar Nachman, he said, had this guy been on the opposite end of the earth, God would have caused him to fly, so to speak, to be there in order to relieve the righteous Boaz of the anxiety of waiting. Um, Again, these guys are really digging deep and looking at the spiritual side of this, and where do they get this from? It's their impression. They were men who sought after the mind of God. They were men who studied the scriptures. They felt these impressions, and it must have been very, very strong for them to write this down. This wasn't just a frivolous um, note that they put in. And so it's just, but it's very interesting. It's hard for us to sometimes grasp this in our Christian background because it's so very foreign to us. But this is, again, the purpose here is what were Jesus and his disciples brought up with. This is what they were brought up with. This is what they were taught in their synagogues. And this is what they maybe didn't all believe, but at least they heard it and they knew it existed. And so Boaz plays his part as the Midrash continues. Ruth played hers, Naomi played hers, and then, of course, God also plays my part, is how the Midrash goes on, which is just a commentary. So then we see something unusual. He says here, Malbim comments that the Redeemer normally didn't pass by the gate, but again, it was divine providence that guided him that day. And so this is interesting to see. Well, here Hirsch talks about the Poloni Almoni and calls it a pseudonym, meaning it wasn't the guy's name, but just a a pseudonym to relate to this person, or was it? Why didn't they want to talk about his name? And so we see here the reference in First Samuel and Second Kings where this was used again. So the sages go off here and say, why didn't they list his real name? Well, they say because this was written after the fact and because this guy didn't do his duty as a redeemer, he doesn't get any airtime. He doesn't get mentioned. No one's going to know him who he was because, he failed in their mind. But again, on the other hand, they look at this as divine providence that it was supposed to be Boaz. It wasn't supposed to be this guy. So again, very interesting how they toss this back and forth. They also bring out again about the law of the Moabite, not the Moabitus, not being able to be part of Jewish culture and be allowed to join in because of the curse that was put upon them. And they believe all this discussion went on. Here, they even feel that this guy had a name, that his real name was Tov. Now, Tov is the word for good in Hebrew, It's used very often just to, and that's Good, as we would say good. Like common greeting is Boker Tov, which is good morning, or Erev Tov, which is good night. So they talk about this name Tov because the guy blew it. He didn't deserve to be called Tov, and so his name is lost. Where they get this from, I really don't know. Part that's kind of interesting here is they talk about this guy being Boaz's uncle. And so they feel he was, as Boaz was relating, he's a closer kinsman redeemer and has the, maybe we'll call it the first right of refusal to take over this redeemership. But remember previously they said Boaz was very old, thought to be 80, and there are even some, we're going to get to it, commentary that feels that, on his wedding night after the marriage was consummated, Boaz had a heart attack and died. And we'll find that coming up. But if Boaz was that old, uh, how old was his uncle? And, I know that there can be some family dynamics where the uncle can be not that much older than the person. I had an uncle that was just 10 years older than myself because of the large family that my father came from. And even in today's somewhat, I'll call them modern families, there are children who are born that are uncles and aunts that are actually younger than their nieces and nephews because of how that all works. So don't really know the ages here. We just know that Boaz is attributed as being elderly, based upon last week's discussion where he complimented Ruth for not going after the hot young guys that are working in the field, that she wanted to be with him. But again, I don't really think he was that old. So anyway, moving on. So we get through that verse and we go back to verse 2. So they've met. They're under the gate. How do they work business? Vayikach, and he took Sarah, 10 Nashim, men, and Mitzikne, the elders. This is from the word Zakar, meaning Zakin being old. And so Ha'ir Viomer. So, in order to conduct business, as we will see as we unpack this one, he says he took 10 men of the elders of the city. And here's where we learn a little bit how their system was all set up. It has a quorum of 10, and lots of commentary here about this number 10. You also find that this translates over into the Jewish synagogues. It was originally one of the rules that you could not bring the Torah scroll out and read it unless you had a quorum of 10 Jewish men. And this is still the pretty much the rules in Orthodox synagogues. But unfortunately, as the Jewish population has dwindled, especially in different um, facets of Judaism, there's not as many people available in the conservative, which is another branch of Judaism, conservative synagogue. And I know the one here in town that I've attended, they will only bring the Torah scroll out if there are 10 living, breathing people there. They have accepted women as being part of this 10 quorum. They've accepted children. They've even accepted outsiders. So if you are there present, they count you as one of the 10, and I believe Reform Judaism does the same. But in Orthodox and maybe the Chabad, which is a form of Orthodox, they have to have 10 believing Jewish men in the presence there, and then they can bring the Torah scroll out. So this is where this comes from. So they wanted 10 men there who were part of the Sanhedrin, able to make this judgment call and provide, in their understanding, sound judgment. So he says to them, Shavu po, sit here. Vayeshevu, and so they sat down. Again, just interesting. Calls them, tells them to sit, and they sat. A lot of detail here. Verse 3, Vayomer lago el And he said to this guy, the kinsman redeemer, again, doesn't list his name, Poloni Almoni, Chelta, the piece of land, Hasadeh, Asher Leachinu, uh, Leelimelech, so which belonged to our brother. Again, the term brother is used very loosely. It is just a sign of family relationship. It doesn't denote actual hierarchy of bloodline being passed down. And so he says, here's what his business is. We're going to talk about this land of Elimelech, Elimelech in English, Makara, that was sold to Naomi, Hasavah, and she is now back from Misadeh, the country of Moab. And so this is the scene. This is what they're going to talk about. So again, as the rabbis look at this, they talk about this, the pecking order, the sitting order, about who tells who to sit, and talking about who perhaps Boaz was. They think he was the head of the Sanhedrin council. And so they talk about Boaz's family, and I tried to look up where they got these names of Salmon and Tov, being these people in the family food line, I guess of relativity of who was the rightful kinsman redeemer and who was Tov's father and who was Boaz's father. And this probably comes from the genealogies that appear in other books of the Bible, even in the beginning of the book of Matthew and the book of Luke. These genealogies are important because they help us trace these lineages down, and many times we will just skip over them. But again, they're very, very important. So again, talking about uh, the brother here, and then we get to the finishing of this verse and the rules of halakhic law of who could sell what, and after it was sold, how many years between sale and redemption. And there's a lot in the Bible that God has brought down about how land was to be kept in the family and how things were supposed to be handled to preserve the family unit, to preserve the heritage, and to make sure that everyone had land to survive upon and had a chance for existence. So I didn't get to verse 5 as I had hoped to. We're going to stop here at the end of verse 3, and we'll pick up on verse 4 next week. But I hope you enjoyed this study. Again, very interesting, and I look forward to catch up with you next week. God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.